Hi everyone, welcome to another Broken Meeple Blitz review, and as you can see there's quite a few games to get over. I mentioned on my stream that when I've got a lot of games on the plate I was going to do compilation videos in order to review as many games as I can and give you my verdict and of course seal of endorsement and distinction if applicable. But these are 5 separate styles of games that I wanted to go over, and I must admit it's quite board and dice centric here because Tawantinsuyu, Mandala Stones and Escape Tales are all from board and dice. However, we also have the rival networks from Formal Ferret Games and a near final retail version of Chai for 2, which is currently, I believe, on Kickstarter from Steet Games. So I'm going to go through all of these in turn, give you an overview, give you a review of the game, say my pros and cons, give a verdict, and hopefully you'll get something out of this video, even if not every single game is on your list. We'll start with the Escape Tales. Now, these ones I'm doing as a batch because, frankly, if you like one, chances are you're going to like another. These are the escape room style games that Board and Dice do, and I think I already did a review for the first one, The Awakening I think it was called, a little while ago. But this is Low Memory, which came out shortly after Awakening, and then there was a bit of a gap between this one and the more recent Children of Wormwood. And both of these play in very much the same style as The Awakening. They are escape room style games, so all the puzzles in the world. Except that, as I said with The Awakening, this series does a better job at giving you a story, a plot, a narrative to go with what it is you're doing. Yes, okay, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see quite so many puzzles appear if this was like a real life thematic event, but rather than just simply being like the exit games where it's just like, here's a book, bunch of puzzles, solve it, whatever, narrative, don't care. Here it actually tries to give you a decent story with a plot line that's like, okay, where is this going? Where do I go from here? With branching paths and different endings. So I gave Awakening a 9 out of 10, I believe, because I really did enjoy it. It had some good puzzles. It was really dark. I mean, you were trying to get your daughter, who was in a coma, saved by using occult methods and stuff. It was kind of weird. It was like, whoa, okay, dark, but I liked it, and I certainly enjoyed the endings that I got from it. Well, here you have Low Memory, which is much more sci-fi related, so kind of think of like an episode of Black Mirror in this case. You're trying to recall events that have happened because you've effectively woken up and it's like, huh? Why is everything trashed? What's going on? I don't remember a thing. Hang on, let me just look back at my memories with this weird device and see what's going on, and then it's like the plot unfolds. Here you've got to unfold the tale from 3 different perspectives, but as before, you've got an app that you can get from Board and Dice to help you with doing the puzzles. There's all sorts of bits and bobs here. The puzzles themselves are really good. They're really intriguing. The story is quite cool, seeing like 3 different perspectives of the same events. And of course, like before, you have multiple endings, which means that what you decide to do in story moments will affect how the thing ends, and much like Black Mirror, it's not always a good ending. In fact, if anything, it's mostly a bad ending. But this is how Low Memory works. Children of Wormwood goes down more the fantasy route, so the dark fantasy. Essentially, you are, you're trying to stay out of the woods because there's all sorts of nasty, like fantastical creatures there that are kind of like, the plants have gone nasty. But I don't want to say much more about it because the plot is quite integral to this one. If I spoil any more, then it will give too much away. But this one is very much like the other one. It has multiple endings, you have the app, and of course you do escape room puzzles. But this one is much longer. Wow. I mean, this one and The Awakening were already quite lengthy. They were a good 2 to 3 hours at least or something. This one is easily going to take a group of people probably 4 to 5 hours at least to complete. There's 60 different endings in this. That's quite a lot. There's quite a lot of content in this one. So this is definitely like the bumper edition of this game. If you're playing it solo, you're probably looking at, reductions at maybe like 2 to 3 hours, but still that's quite a long length of time for an escape room game. I mean, you can finish the exit ones and the unlock ones in barely an hour if you're playing it solo, but this one, whew, yeah, you're getting your money's worth out of these games. And again, this one is dark and it has the the dark and the bitter ending, shall we say. So it's got good replay value. How many times I'd want to play each of these kind of depends. Yes, okay, there's branching paths, but it's not like I'm going to play this 10 times to see what they are. What you'll probably do is maybe play it 2-3 times absolute max, and then you'll probably just skim to the end and read through all the other endings. I never felt like I wanted to play this more than about 2 or 3 times myself, because you're going to repeat certain puzzles. There's only so many, you'll have to repeat certain parts to get to the bits that you haven't done. So you'll probably just prefer to read the endings at that point. But nonetheless, you will get your money's worth out of these. These have got some of the best replay values of all the escape room style games. It is easily my favorite of this genre, even though I will say I'm kind of burnt out on this genre. I'm sort of done. You know, I don't need to have any more escape room games. You know, after playing this and The Awakening, I'm kind of done. You know, they're good. I like puzzles, but I don't need a ton of them. I certainly don't need the ones, you know, I stopped playing the exit games a while back. I haven't played the unlock ones for ages. I've kind of stuck to these ones. So, yeah, these are pretty solid as well. I'd give these, well, I'm getting a little burnt out on the genre myself, I will admit. But I will say I'll still give these a 9 out of 10 like the Awakening ones, a seal of distinction. I still think that for the amount of content you get in these and for the cool, engaging narrative that you have, I mean, it's not going to win an Oscar or anything, but it's certainly like engaging enough. But for the amount of value that these contain, these are easily the escape room games that I recommend for you out there. Alright, let's move on to Chai of Tea for 2. This is a Kickstarter that's going on at the moment, and it is a 2-player sort of sequel in a sense, sister game to Chai from Steeped Games. Now, I've only played Chai a couple of times and I enjoyed it. It was fine. It looked very beautiful. It was a very nice, like not immersive, but a nice, pleasant, relaxing theme. And that was about as much as I got much experience with it. It was like, it was nice. It was simple. It was beautifully produced. Nice little game. Why not for 1 to 5 players? You're still like getting tea tokens and you're making teas. Okay, that much is said. But with this one, and like I said, the components are essentially near final, so I wouldn't take this too much. You've still got lots of cool wooden pieces, the dice, and the very beautiful artwork all over the boards and cards. I mean, it's beautifully illustrated. But what you're doing here is that, again, it's dice placement, and you've got various cards that you can acquire using the dice. You'll roll them as your tea workers, effectively, at the start of the round, and you'll allocate them to various spots in order to collect cards or reserve a ship to transport your tea away, or to get movement or production, as it's called. But it's essentially a kind of like a spatial movement game in a sense. You've got these player boards here, and you can use an A or B side, but, you know, stick with A for your first game, I reckon. And the idea is that as you get the tokens, they go on the bottom of the board, and then via the use of cards and that production movement that I mentioned, you move them up the board to the top where they then go on the ships that you've reserved. The different types of tea have to go up different routes, so, you know, blue and black has to go up here, then over to the right and up there. Purple has its own kind of little route up here it has to go, whereas white can just go straight up, and so can green and yellow. It's like, they've got different things depending on the token, and if you go on the B side, the routes get even more, like, convoluted, and there's like extra little effects that go on. It's certainly a bit more advanced when you flip the thing over. But essentially, it's all about the combos of trying to get your tokens to move up this track as fast as possible to get onto those ships, because the ships act as a timer for the end of the game. There are some other ways to get points by acquiring some of the cards. There's one that's set collection, collect the more of these you get, the more points you get, and some of the effect cards have got 1 or 2 points attached, but primarily you're doing it via the ships. So I was thinking, okay, is this just going to be the same as a two-player variant of Chai? No, actually, to be honest, with Chai, I think it worked better as a multiplayer game. This feels very different to Chai, though. I don't feel I'm playing the same game as Chai, just the 2-player version. This one feels like its own standalone thing, just utilizing the same artwork. But I actually quite enjoyed this one. It's a very simple concept, you know, get the tokens up the board and just getting them onto ships, and the ships just say whether they want 2 blue or black or green or whatever. The theme is abstracted to a degree, but the puzzle of trying to figure out like the best way to get your tokens up this track is pretty engaging. You've got a lot of spaces that you can put your dice to, and I was a bit worried like, oh, is the dice luck going to be a bit of an issue with this one, you know, if I roll badly? But it's not too bad. You know, whichever dice you roll with this, yes, okay, some higher dice can be better than lower dice, but then you need at least as a certain number as opposed to the exact number. But also, you get rewarded potentially for having more in a sequence than necessarily high numbers. It's all well and good saying, oh, somebody's got 2 6s, well, that's going to beat everything I put down. Well, no, if I've got a 1, 2, or if I've got 3 1s, that beats his 2 6s because it's an extra die. So you shouldn't get too blocked out with these dice when you use them on the board. And so I didn't find that, I mean, it's a light game. Okay, there's going to be an element of luck there, but I felt that you know, when you're rolling this many dice, it kind of swings and roundabouts. It came, whatever bad luck you might have had one turn, usually like you got good luck another turn. The cards themselves, again, beautifully illustrated, but this is where the crux of the game really lies for me. These cards are really cool. They just do simple effects like when you put them on your board, it moves up your white leaves or moves up your green leaves, or you can store the purple and the yellow on a card and get points at the end of the day. But what I love is this little like cool mechanic where around the side of the board you've got slots, and you put the card on the slot like around it, and basically anytime a token moves onto that spot, it triggers the ability on the card. Now some of them flip over so that they don't get used often enough, but there are ways to flip them back. But you can actually move these cards around the edge of your board and do some really cool shenanigans with these things. Like, you know, if I get several of these Earl Whites here that say move a white token up, I could put one over here and then put one up here and then maybe like one over there, and then suddenly as soon as a white token appears, it goes all the way up and just like zooms to the top. So you can create some nifty little combos, and if that's your thing, I think you will get a kick out of this game. The rule book was a little bit hit and miss. There was some wording issues I thought around there. It didn't clearly explain a couple of concepts that I think should have been better explained. But this is a Kickstarter copy, so I would imagine that the rulebook would be fairly ironed out by that point. So, you know, granted, this is a review for a game that hasn't been fully released in its retail format, but honestly, I thought this was really entertaining. I think if you've got an interest in this game on the Kickstarter, I reckon give it a back. It's not one that I'm going to back personally, mainly just because it is restricted mainly for 2 players. There is a solo mode in here, but the solo mode is not really that great. I mean, it's fine, you flip over a card and the AI does a few things, but it's a little bit confusing as to how the AI scores at the end. You know, this is where I mean that the rulebook's a little bit ambiguous in places. I wouldn't buy this hoping for a really good solo game. I would buy this expecting a really good 2-player game, and if that's your thing, then by all means do so. I reckon this one would be a good one though for my local cafe, although I'll probably have to get a proper retail copy on release in order to pass them it, because I don't really want to give them a Kickstarter version per se. But yeah, it's a neat little game, very pleasant, very nicely produced, well illustrated, a very nice, simple 2-player game with some depth and some interesting choices with a little bit of replayability as well. So good on there. Chai, T for 2. I'd give that about 7 out of 10 overall with seal of endorsement, and check it out if you want to. Alrighty, let's move on to the Rival Networks. Now, from Formal Ferret Games by Jehovah, this is a 2-player standalone version, no solo mode, this is purely a 2-player game here. It's a standalone version of The Network. So it was where you were running a TV station and you were trying to put weird shows on the different slots and get ratings, get viewers, and obviously be better than the other people's channels. The Networks I was okay with. It didn't bowl me over that much, but I like the concept and I like the idea of the silly theme behind it. The art style is, I will say, not for me. Not to say it's bad art, but it's not my style of art, but I didn't mind that too much when I played the original. The jokes, the humour with the various shows where it's sort of a parody and that, it's nice. It gets a chuckle out of me now and again. It makes the game fairly light, you know, without making it like too mean or vindictive. It just had quite a lot of rules on the go, like you had to keep track of quite a few things. It had quite a lot of depth actually for what was essentially a card game. But, you know, the Networks was decent. You know, I didn't love it to bits, but I thought it was fine. So this 2-player standalone version is still the same thing. You've got your TV channel and you are trying to be better than the opponent.
Everybody loves Hypnotoad.
This show's been going downhill since season 3.
Except in this case, you're doing it with streamlined rules compared to the Networks. So you got a couple of little houses that you do. You build them in advance and they basically hold your viewer tokens, which is your victory points essentially. You keep them secret from the opponent, which is, I don't see why that's overly necessary. It seems like a weird element to throw in because you've only got the one opponent. Why does it need to be secret? But, well, I digress. It's a small niggle. But you've got the boards in the middle that select the slots, and mostly it's cards. So you've got various cards for all the different shows that you can run. There's not a huge amount of them though, and you are going to see them like every single one come out of the deck, which is a bit of a hit on its replay value. I mean, you've seen every single show without any form of variety is a little bit restrictive, especially as when you look at the genre bonuses on here, which is quite a cool concept. If you play a certain amount of cards of the same type, you get a bonus. It's cool to trigger those, like, draw an extra couple of cards, get a mega star, get some ratings points, and it's for things like sports, drama, and sci-fi. But there's 2 on here for documentaries and game shows as an expansion. I don't think that should have been the case here. I really think that if you're going to try and make this like the best game it can be, why not just throw everything into the backs? For the sake of 2 separate genres, which by the looks of it aren't going to be anything major unless they've got some special rules attired with them, but why have the player aid with expansion stuff that most people who buy the retail version won't have? That doesn't quite make sense to me. Is the plan to release it with the game and have it as a variant? Then fine, but honestly, I would just throw everything in, including some of the other rules you've got in here. You've got executive powers, which give you a player power to start the game. Again, throw those in. Why do you need that as a variant? There's an easy way to play where you don't use these network cards and advertisements, which basically are, they're kind of like one-shot abilities and that. Honestly, throw them into the game. I don't think you need to simplify this game much, really, because the game is pretty straightforward. I mean, it definitely is a streamlined version of the networks. None of the abilities felt ambiguous in any way, and it's basically a tug-of-war effort. Each of the slots that you've got has got a point track for moving your counter along. You only have 1 show on each side per player, and the idea is that when you play the show, you can put a star in it, and if the stars match or if the thing's in the correct slots, you get a certain amount of rating points, which gets you these viewer tokens for VP, and basically you're kind of constantly like to and froing with the opponent's counter on there, because not only will you get bonus points at the end of a season, as they call it, when you basically there's 3 rounds at the end of a round, but there's also award cards where you can opt for like other scoring opportunities, like be the leader in a 10 p.m. slot, or have 1 network card, or have only 1 sports show in your lineup. They're pretty easy to achieve for the most part, and overall it's nice. I don't think this is gonna blow people away. But I also don't think this is necessarily that different from the networks. I don't think if you've got a copy of the networks that you would buy this and play this like at the same time as the networks. Granted, I don't think the networks worked as well 2-player. I think it had a variant for the rules in there. So this is definitely the better choice if you're only playing it 2-player. But I can't see you sort of going, well, I've got this 2-player version, now I'll get the multiplayer version and vice versa. I feel like you would pick and choose which one you want. I've already got the networks, I'm kind of good with that, unless you really want a 2-player version, in which case you can grab this. But otherwise, I'd be just looking at it from like a different perspective and just going, do you want the multiplayer version? Get networks. Do you want 2 players? Get this one. Pretty simple. I don't believe you can play the networks solo, maybe you can, but don't quote me on that. But this one is full and foremost a 2-player game. No solo mode is in the backs. But it's a decent little game. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's mainly humor. Collecting these ads for money to buy the network cards is pretty straightforward. The mega stars are just like comedy parodies like Dashing Lead, Career Stunner, Uncannily Talented Hacker, Physical Comedy Master, Anime Hero, Local Tricycling Champion. There's all sorts of like weird little chuckles that you'll get from this. But other than that, I found it very easy to learn after 1 read of the rulebook. The production quality is nice enough. I mean, these houses are a little bit on the fiddly side because the roof doesn't stay on that firmly. So sometimes you find you accidentally flick the roof off. But, it's a minor little quibble. It's nice that they actually gave you something in there for it. And yeah, it's fine, but it didn't blow me away either. I'm kind of like hard to press what to rate this one. So I think overall this one's getting a 6 out of 10 for me. I like it and I'll happily play it. I think it was a decent little card game, nice and simple, but I don't think it's like setting itself apart from the original networks enough to make it go, oh yeah, standalone title. This kind of gives me the same feeling as Cave vs. Cave did for Caverna. I played the 2-player version of that and I thought, it's fine, I'd play it, but I don't see why I would have this over the bigger game. And the same with this. I don't see, other than you are focused entirely on playing this as a 2-player game, would you necessarily get this one over the networks? So again, I kind of pick and choose, but it's simple, it's light, it's well produced, the rules are pretty good, the rulebook and that, so it's a decent game. just not one that I'm going to be like seeking out too much in the future. Alrighty, now let's go back on to board and dice with Mandala stones, and I must admit I am a little confused as to their decision to give you weird, like slightly ripped out boxes and stuff like that. I mean, it's an interesting packaging idea, but honestly I think it might put off a few people. Yeah, I know, I'm joking. FedEx sent me a bashed box because FedEx don't know how to deliver games. This one is a little bit battered and torn and ripped, but thankfully the components were safe, so I could at least play the game and check it out. This is a new abstract game. Philippe Glowaz, sorry I can't pronounce the name, but essentially who runs Board and Dice. This is definitely aiming for the same area as Reef and Azul. We're talking light, gateway level, with depth, abstract game. This is definitely like hunting down that market to try and be the next Azul in a sense. 2 to 4 players, 30 minutes, you get where I'm going here, it's definitely going down that route. Question is, did it succeed? Well, with this one, very simple game. You have a board with lots of different like pillars and stones all over it. These very nicely produced bait-like tile stones all over it. I mean, wow. I love bait-like pieces, stuff like that. I mean, it works well in Azul with those like funky plastic things. Yinch has a similar thing with their tiles. I love this component. It's just so nice. I mean, this is entirely where the budget of this game is going. Lovely, very nicely detailed with different patterns and things. It's like, ooh, really, really nice. But the way it works is that you've got these pillars on the board, and they're all set up with there, and basically what happens is that you have to move the pillar from one spot to the next, and then depending on how many of those towers with these stones have got matching patterns, you take those stones off the pile. You've then got your own player board where once you've taken those stones, they go on your player board and stack up into 5 different spots. So that's your typical turn. Move a pillar, get some stones, put them on your board in one big stack. Okay, cool, nice and simple. But then at your own discretion, you choose to score the various towers that you've got. And all the 5 towers score for different reasons. So the first one will score you based on how many different height towers you've got. Okay, cool. Second one scores you more points for the stone that's at the bottom of the tower. So the smaller the tower, the better it is. Another one is trying to get it so that it's like in the middle in a sense. Another one wants it to be as tall as it can possibly be, and the 5th one is more concerned about different colors in the tower. So they've all got their own different characteristics. Alternatively, you can just take the top of each tower and score 1 point each. You score and mark yourself on your own track, and the stones go on this final sort of, I'd say, timer board in the sense. You get some extra points if you fill up the spots, but mainly you just keep going and going until eventually, I believe you start off on the edge. Yeah, I think you start off on the edge and keep going until you get into the middle, depending on player count, obviously, and then that ends the game and you tally up the points. This actually was quite a big surprise, actually, because I do like these small abstract games. Abstract games are cool. They're nice. They're simple to teach. I mean, I pretty much just went over the entire rule set in about 5 minutes, and they play with a good amount of depth. You've got some extra like point scoring opportunity cards depending on what you do in the game. Some very simple player aids. I do hate having to turn them over, for a double-sided player aid when it relates to what you can do on your turn. It's like, but as a minor niggle, it saves on production, why not? Let's face it, you know where it's all gone, this lovely bag of tiles. But the game itself has got a surprising amount of depth to it. You are faced with some very agonizing decisions on this board with the pillars and the stones, trying to decide, well, hang on a minute, that space is taken up, I can't move it there. But if I move it there, I'm only going to get a couple of stones, but then I'm leaving it open for you to get a bunch of stones because I know you can see everybody's board. It's public information. So you've got to think about what you want, but also versus what the opponents are going after, particularly if they're likely to go after one of these +2 bonuses on the main board. It's like, I can't afford to let you have that +2 bonus, so I shouldn't give you those tiles, so maybe I'll put this one back over here. The choices get more limited as the game goes on, and I have finished this game with very tight scores. I mean, this is one of those ones where, you really can't call the winner of this game for the most part until near the end. And even then, at the end, you might be like, oh, I don't know, did I get slightly more? What was my personal objective? It's like, nah, this is very, very close. And as I say, it's got a good amount of depth as well, with simple rules, and as all abstract games for family weight have to be, they have to look good. So overall, I was quite impressed with this one. It's not one that I would pull out to play like over and over again, but then I'm kind of the same with Reef and Azul. But I will say, this is, as I said, hunting down that market for like Azul and Reef, you know, family weight abstract game. You don't need 5-10 different family weight abstract games, I don't believe, especially not when they take up this much storage space. You know, you kind of just need one or two. I've got to make a decision as to which one of these three I prefer, and so far, I still think I prefer Reef.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Out of all three of them, I like the card playing Reef, I like the way that looks, all the colourful and the stacking in that, and it's very quick. You know, I like Reef the most. I actually think, though, this is better than Azul.
What?
Azul has been fun, but it's starting to get a little bit one note now. You know, every time I play it, I feel like I'm playing it pretty much the same way, particularly with what scoring opportunities to go for. And I wasn't a big fan of the variant versions that they brought out, especially not Sintra. I hated that one. And the one that came after, I forget its name, Pavilion I think it was okay, but I still preferred the original one for simplicity. I still highly recommend Azul for, you know, family weight abstract game. But I think if I'm going to pick which one I'd rather have on my shelf, I'd rather have Mandala stones, actually. I think the added depth of this game makes each experience not necessarily feel fundamentally different, but the decisions feel more agonizing in this than they do in Azul. With Azul, I'm kind of like, well, I can't go for that color. All right, well, fine, that's probably the next best choice then. But here, you're really staring at that board thinking, oh, where can I go? Where can I go? The tower's not so high. I go there, I can get 2. That means I could shove it on that tower and make that 4 high. That's good. Oh, hang on, he's going to trigger that bonus. I better get to him pretty quick. Oh, I don't know. And it just does work quite well. If anything, it's actually harder to achieve your run endgame scoring objectives. I mean, 7 VP if you end the game with only this pattern visible on your player board. Good luck trying to fulfill some of these. They are not easy, but they add a nice, interesting challenge. So it's one of those games that can be fun to play, easy to learn, easy to teach, but have a good, surprising amount of depth to keep you coming back for more plays. I was honestly very impressed with this one. I would probably give this one a solid 8 out of 10. You know, as I say, not one that I think I'm going to pull out all the time. But whenever it gets offered on the table and it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's been a couple of weeks since I've played that one, you know what, yeah, why don't we play a game of this? Should take only about 30 minutes, although watch for the analysis paralysis player. They could slow this game up a lot more than, say, Azul, but yeah, I mean, I'm certainly going to hunt down a nicer looking copy of it, shall we say. You know, will FedEx give me my claim for their busted delivery? Then we'll see. But failing that, I'll just have to bite the bullet and get myself a retail copy on release. But yeah, this would be a good one that I would like to keep in the collection for that sort of weight, you know, show it to the family. And maybe Azul will be next on the coal pile. We'll have to see. But yeah, 8 out of 10, seal of endorsement. Definitely check this one out. I think it's on Tabletopia or Tabletop Simulator, certainly one of the two. But yeah, give this one a try, particularly if you're into family weight abstract. Okay, now the big one. Whew, yes, Tawantinsuyu. I almost felt like giving this one a detail review, but decided to do a blitz in the end. This one. Yes, if you can't pronounce half of these T games, well, they're not going to stop making them, put it that way. This is the next in line for that massive T series that they do, these heavy Euro games with very complex mechanics based on Incas or Aztecs, you know, that kind of like setting, shall we say, which to be fair is one of the more interesting world culture settings, I'll give it that. But this one is a highly complex Euro where it kind of bears a similarity to 5 Tribes, actually, with like using colour meeples to do your various biddings. You have this huge board. I'm going to get all this massive load of stuff out. There's a ton in this box, it's got to be said. And you've got this huge board with a giant, essentially like big pyramid thing on it with all these different shapes for the spaces and lots of different actions that you can do. The idea is that you are placing colour meeples on the board to trigger those actions by way of tasks. So as you put a certain colour meeple on the board, you get to trigger X amount of actions depending on what colour meeple's nearby or what type of meeple it is. They've all got their special rules akin to 5 tribes in that sense. And the crux of the game is just get VP at the end of the day. I mean, the theme in this is pretty pasted overall, I must be said. We'll get onto that in a minute. But there's a lot of ways you can get points. It's very much a tactical point salad style game. And I do mean the word tactical here, because you might decide, well, what am I going to do in this game? Well, I could go for these conquests around the outside. I could go level myself up the temple track, wherever that's got to. Where's that huge temple? Whoop, massive board here. So this giant temple here, I could level up here for a bunch of points. Maybe I'm just going to grab a ton of these weavings, which are like pattern tiles that you can collect in order to score points for how long a tapestry weave you can do.
There are tapestries.
Come on, seriously, did you think I wasn't going to make a tapestry joke? I gotta use that meme as often as I can. How often do you think tapestries feature in board games? But I digress. So, and you can also get buildings. You can build buildings that can give you some extra resources as production or give you a special ability. There's a lot going on in this game, it has to be said. And that's just placing the meeples. You've also got a high priest that goes around the center part, which triggers actions which not only you get to do, but the opponents get to do, but were at a greater cost. Though I will say, aside from the conquest action, really, the opponents don't tend to follow you on those things. The conquest action is relatively cheap. You get to do it a little bit better than they do, but they're going to want to play their cards at that time. But stuff like level up the temple or get the, level up the temple or pay, whether you pay in statues or corn, the cost for the other players, like the non-active player, is so high that I've never seen anybody take them up on that. It's like, sorry, it took me a long time to get this statue. Do you think I'm going to give you this statue for 1 leap up there compared to your 3 leaps that you get? It's like, no. So you're usually on your own with these actions, but again, it's another thing to consider because the priest not only dictates those actions, but also how much everything costs. It's like, oh my god, and this is the good and the bad thing about this game. The complexity rating of these tea games is usually pretty high. Teotihuacan has always been my favourite of the tea games. It is still on my shelf, and Tekenu has kind of followed afterwards. This one is another complex one in that line, but I would say it's probably the most complex, or at least the most complex to get your head around at first. That's your player rate. There's a lot of stuff on that player rate, and to be fair, it's a good player rate. Not great, good. There are some bits that could be better explained that you have to kind of refer back to the rulebook for, but as a memory jogger, this is a very good comprehensive player rate. But you've got to look through all this at a regular basis while trying to think about what you want to do. And, you've got different costs for food that you have to pay wherever you put your meeple anywhere. So you're looking at what symbol you can do, and it's like, well, hang on, that's 1 away from the priest, that's 1 potato, it's a second level, so that's 2 potato, so that's 3 potato, but then there's a staircase there, so if I give him a victory point, that's minus 2 potatoes, so that's only 1 potato.
Potatoes!
I'm crying out loud, it's like, that's quite a lot to consider. And this one kind of goes a little bit too far down that fiddly complexity route for me. I mean, I like heavy games, come on, case in point, but with this one, I feel that there's a lot of extra steps you have to do when considering your turn. Imagine a heavy Euro where, like Kanban, you've got the different departments there, you know what the departments do, and it's fairly clear cut, those are your options. Which of those departments do I want to do? Okay, design. Go there, resolve it. Yes, it's complex, it's a hard decision to make, but still, everything's laid out for you. Here though, there's an extra step, because before you decide which of your options you want to do, you need to first know what your options even are in the first place, because you've got to hunt them down. You've got this entire board that you can put your meeple on. That's a lot of spaces. Now granted, you probably won't put your meeple on a good, say, 1/3 of those spaces at any one time, because it'll be behind your priest and the potato cost is way too high. But wow, I mean, you first got to dictate, right, hang on a minute, I've got these god cards in front of me that dictate where I can even go on the board, unless you're like a flush with gold, and it's like, well, hang on a minute, that symbol's there, 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 and there. Right, okay, so that, probably not those two, maybe those two. What do they get me? Oh, they get me those actions. Right, and let's repeat that for the other god cards you have in your hand. But then even once you've figured out, right, those are my options, now I've got to decide which option is even best, and it's hard to gauge exactly how good they are. It's not that it's too complicated, like nobody can understand it. I mean, you know, I managed to deal with it fine after a bit, but when I've been teaching this game, it does overwhelm quite a few players if they're not used to this kind of thing. This is definitely going to be one of those games that you really need to be like die-hard, heavy gamer to get the most out of this, because it does jump that extra level in complexity. Now, you know, the actions themselves, in terms of, all right, that gets me points like this, that gets me this, or whatever, aren't themselves complicated. It's just the fact that you've got quite a lot to look over. And it gets worse when you get to the solo mode. The solo mode in this, Axel Mama, or is it? Yeah, Axel Mama, is a good solo mode. Don't get me wrong. Very good solo mode. It's, you know, it's well done, well designed. It's akin to the Chronobot from Anachrony, which I really liked. And it follows that same sort of deal where you've got number counters that go over the various actions. And when you roll a die, you trigger those particular counters and they move. And so the counters are in different spots to simulate a human opponent. That is great. I love that. But wow. I mean, you already have this player rate to look at. You now have this player rate to look at. And the rules with the solo mode tend to take what you've learned in the multiplayer section, flip it on its head a bit, tweak them slightly, and then give you the rules. Wow, the brain will melt trying to understand every single rule in the solo mode. It's going to take you a long time, and for me, it just crossed that line of how much effort I want to spend getting a solo mode to the table. The Chronobot is easier to work with than this is. That's saying something, because the Chronobot is already a fairly complex solo mode. Here though, wow, I have to learn all of this and all of this on top of everything. Trying to remember all of this when you put this game away in the box and then come back to it maybe 2 weeks later, good luck with that. Honestly, good luck trying to remember the rules of this game. It's going to be tricky. And wow, I mean, the rulebook itself is not too bad, but for the multiplayer section, there's a couple of bits that are not well explained. There's 1 or 2 bits of iconography that I can't even recall if they're even explained in the book. I had to kind of look them up on FAQs to find out what they meant. But then when it gets to the solo mode, all the goodwill that was in the multiplayer section in terms of pictorial examples and that goes out the window. The solo mode, like rulebook stuff, is just a wall of text. I can't find it at the moment, it's probably buried under here, but it's like a wall of text. So trying to read that section of the rulebook gets really, really complicated at that point. And it just crossed that line where I just wasn't as comfortable with it. Sounds like I'm downing the game a lot. There's, you know, and I do have to bring those points up, but it is a solid game. It's just the barrier to entry is high, very high, for a game that, honestly, with what you're doing in the game, which is essentially collect some food, build some basic buildings, you know, build a few statues and level up a track here and there, shouldn't be as complicated as that. I feel like this kind of just needed like one extra level of streamlining, and then it's like, ah, perfect, you've got exactly what I need from it. But I enjoy coming up with all these different choices. I enjoy having all the different options of what to do, and I like the fact that it's more tactical. You know, you cannot really say, I'm going to focus entirely on the temple, because you may do well up to a point, but then you might struggle to do any more temple stuff because of what god cards you get and what other things turn up in the game. You might have to change your tact, except this game actually gives you the opportunity to do that, score a bunch of points, and not be left behind, which is really cool. But, you know, I will say that there's a little bit of luck element though that is a little off-putting. The god cards, obviously when you draw them, you're kind of stuck with whatever symbol is on the god card. Now yes, there's a face-up tableau, but if you don't like what's there, you'll draw randomly from the deck and it might not be the symbol you want. On top of that, there's also the combat cards for these conquest regions, which have 1 or 2 soldiers on them, and basically you flip them upside down or you kill them off in order to, you know, like use them and get various bonuses, but it's complete luck of the draw as to whether you draw a 2 or 1. If you draw a 2, I have done twice as good as you who drew a 1. And it's not like it's like, oh, it's only a small advantage. No, I mean, you know, 2, 3, 4, 7, 11 victory points you can get for this particular region. And there's only one difference in terms of what you need in order to get from one bit to the other. If I got to that spot, literally just because I got lucky at drawing 2s, that's no skill on my part, that was just pure luck. Same for the tapestries. You only get 1 face-up tapestry. The rest you have to draw from the deck at random and hope that the tapestry you want is there. It's all well and good saying, well, I need this particular design, or at least 1 or 2 designs. Then you draw 4 tiles off and it's like, oh, there's nothing there. Oh, well, I don't really want any of these tiles. That was a bit of a waste of a turn, and you don't get a huge amount of turns in this game, particularly with the way the timer works, which, variable end-game timer, I do appreciate that. So, like I say, it sounds like I'm ragging a lot, but I do think that this is going to appeal to a lot of heavy gamers, a lot. I mean, I enjoyed my plays of this overall. I think this is a solid game, and I think some heavy gamers are going to love it to bits. If somebody comes up and says this is their #1 of the year, I totally buy it. I totally understand, and I'd be glad of it. I would definitely recommend heavy gamers give this one a look. But I am going to stress that the barrier to entry in terms of getting all the rules down, dealing with the smorgasbord of information you have on here, especially when you add the solo mode on top, which is well designed, but just a lot of extra rules to get on your plate, you are going to have to bear that in mind. I've got to be a little bit generous here. I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I'm going to give it a seal of endorsement because I do legitimately enjoy it. And I do like it. Not as much as Teotihuacan, not as much as Tekhenu, and probably definitely not as much as 5 Tribes. But if somebody said, let's play the game and is willing to refresh my memory of the rules, I'm down for it. I would enjoy it. Do not play this with more than 3 players. If you do, you will be there for a long time with AP, so really don't play this with more than 3 players. You know, play this with 2 players, 3 absolute max if you're all like know what you're doing. But yeah, if people want to play it, I'll play it. Hence, I feel like it deserves a seal of endorsement. But that barrier to entry, it's too much for me to recommend it any more than that. So, as I say, it's definitely going to be a favourite for some. It just wasn't quite there for me. So yeah, that's a lot of games there. Escape Tales, Chai for 2, Rival Networks, Mandala Stones, and Tawantinsuyu. Lots of games, lots of different verdicts. Hopefully you got something out of this compilation video. Let me know in the comments what you think, and don't forget to leave a like on the video. Also, check out the 5% discount code for zatu.co.uk in the description. Maybe one of these games took your fancy. Well, when they're out on retail release, which some of them already are, go to Zatu, check if it's in stock, and grab yourself a bargain. That's it for me. I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple review. And remember, as always, it's only a game. Take care, everyone.